totally pressed the button. Whoops. Dang it. 1 minute, please, while I do. It's okay to get acclimated to the room. So we have Stacey Contreras.
Yes.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Fairness is what justice really is. Potter Stewart. We affirm the resolution the U.S. Supreme Court should rule that undocumented, unaccompanied minors do not have the right to an abortion when under the care of Department of Health and Human Services. The majority of the following definitions come from the Oxford Living Dictionaries, a division of Oxford University, which is the oldest university in the English-speaking world. The affirmative definitions are as follows. Supreme Court, the highest federal court in the U.S. consisting of 9 justices, should used to indicate obligation, duty, or correctness, typically when criticizing someone's actions. Undocumented, not having the appropriate legal document or license. Unaccompanied, having no companion or escort. Minors, a person under the age of full legal responsibility. Abortion, the deliberate termination of a human pregnancy most often performed during the first 28 weeks. Care, the provision of what is necessary for the health, welfare, maintenance, and protection of someone or something. Department of Health and Human Services, federal executive division responsible for carrying out government programs and policies relating to human health, welfare, and income security. Contention 1. The government pays for the elective procedure if the minor cannot find a sponsor. Illegal immigrants pay little or no taxes, and they send millions of dollars out of the U.S. to their home country. Illegals are also more likely to use taxpayer-funded social services than citizens. They are entitled to free health care, education, and food stamps. Nearly $5 billion per year spent on illegal aliens. Throughout the case, the Trump administration had argued it had a policy of not facilitating abortions for unaccompanied minors who cross the border illegally. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has said it felt undocumented pregnant minors had no constitutional rights to an elective abortion while in federal custody. The federal government, by law and policy, already facilitates abortions to women in custody. It is only underage immigrant women during the current administration who cannot exercise this choice. The Justice Department argues that an illegal immigrant is not entitled to an abortion could force a teenager to choose between staying in the U.S. or having the abortion. 3-judge panel of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rules the government did not need to immediately allow the girl to have an abortion. Stewart acknowledged the ruling but said the government views this case differently because the teen is an undocumented immigrant in federal custody. He signaled that undocumented minors do not have a constitutional right to an elective abortion in federal custody unless it is a medical emergency, and also said immigrants here illegally have minimal protections in this country. Judge, this means that while every woman of age has the right to an abortion, this does not mean that the federal government of the United States should be the ones providing funding for this elective procedure. Contention number 2, rights of legal citizens. The termination of a pregnancy is a procedure that should not be made available to undocumented, unaccompanied minors on the basis that women who are legal citizens of the United States struggle to obtain this procedure. More than 200,000 women and teenage girls in the United States are currently confined in state and federal prisons, local jails, immigration detention centers, and juvenile facilities. Federal and state courts have consistently held that imprisonment does not negate women's constitutional right to abortion. In practice, however, women must overcome significant obstacles. Whatever barriers impede and delay women in the broader community also hinder women inside. And the reality of physical confinement compounds these burdens. Reproductive control takes on new meaning because jails and prisons literally control women's movements in contact with the outside world. In the 40 cases I reviewed, judges denied minors petitions from arbitrary, absurd, or personal reasons, such as minors' failures to discuss their decisions with the priest. Although the initial hearings are private, summaries and partial transcripts become public when the minors appealed. Judge, this means that if women in the United States must fight for the right to do with their body as they please, why should this right be extended to an individual who is not a citizen of the United States and who does not meet the requirements to obtain aforementioned procedure?
Thank you. before we go on, I realize I goofed. You can go ahead and get prepped if you like to. I realize I goofed. This resolution is actually a very heated topic. So one thing we need to understand is I've done this in debates my entire life. I've had to take sides that I didn't necessarily agree with. Okay, and to me that means that you actually get to understand a new perspective. Although you may not agree with it, sometimes you have to defend things you don't agree with. You can also, this also gives you the power to kind of take advantage of another kind of argument. So one thing I want all of our audience to understand is everyone speaking today, they may not actually share these views, but it is just a part of a debate, and we should take it lightly. There is no offense to this, and if there is, we apologize. But at the same time, these topics are being contested today, so we should definitely take them with a grain of salt. All right, thank you. And you are Rebecca?
Sophie.
Oh, Sophie? Oh, sorry. Sophie, yeah, gotcha.
Should go
Whenever you're ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, just like the New York Attorney General Eric T. Schneiderman, and unlike our opponent, this House stands to support every Jane Doe fighting for fundamental rights to make her own health care decisions. We are here to negate the U.S. Supreme Court decision that ruled that undocumented, unaccompanied minors do not have the right to an abortion under the care of the Department of Health and Human Services. What are our definitions in this debate? Our opponent has defined all of the necessary definitions that we do need. However, I would like to clarify on an unbiased source the definition for abortion. The glossary of sexual health terms found on the Planned Parenthood website defines abortion as, quote, an ending of pregnancy. This means that even a miscarriage is medically considered an abortion. We have two arguments in this debate. First, we wish to educate people further on how these unaccompanied minors are being held during their trials, appeals, and possibly their final termination of pregnancy. If an undocumented minor is being held in state facilities and is forced to undergo trials by U.S. jurisdictions, shouldn't they have the same rights as a citizen in doing so? We'll then move on to elaborate on why the argument for federal funding for abortions for illegal immigrants is weak. The argument most used on the other side of this issue is adoption is always an option. This House stands to show that adoption is not always an option for unplanned pregnancies, and why this plan of action for the mother to have to go through a full pregnancy and give birth violates the rights of all women. I'm not taking questions right now. We will also elaborate on the foster care system and how the conditions that some children live in should not be considered healthy or safe. In 1973, when Roe v. Wade was resolved, the Supreme Court ruled abortion legal nationwide. When abortion was finally legalized, it established a minimal period during which abortion was actually possible. For example, in Texas, the cutoff procedure is issued at 20 weeks. After modification of the law in 1992, the cutoff date varied state by state. However, states cannot place legal restrictions posing a burden for the purpose of placing a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion of a non-viable fetus. In Texas and Louisiana, the state law requires that a parent or a legal guardian provide written permission for unmarried teens to have an abortion. There are a few exceptions to this, however. First, the teen can go before a judge and receive permission without the parent or guardian. Teens who are legally emancipated do not need to have permission from their parent or guardian. And finally, if there is a medical emergency and the pregnant teen needs an abortion, the parent does not have to give permission. Our second observation concerns current immigration laws. This House stands against current immigration laws as they are too strict and unrealistic. The process of what happens to undocumented children, according to the American Immigration Council, are as follows. First, the majority of unaccompanied children encountered at the border are apprehended, processed, and initially detained by CPB. Unlike adults or families, unaccompanied children cannot be placed into expedited removal proceedings. Second, children from a non-contiguous country such as El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras are placed into standard removal proceedings in immigration court. CBP must transfer custody of these children to the Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement within 72 hours. And finally, each child from a contiguous country, i.e. Mexico or Canada, must be screened by a CBP officer in order to determine if, first, he or she is unable to make independent decisions, if she is a victim of trafficking, and if she fears persecution in her home country. If none of these conditions apply, however, CBP will immediately send the child back to Canada or Mexico. On our side of the House, we are not only able to sympathize with expecting mothers trying to gain reproductive rights over their bodies, but are also able to display why specifically all women deserve to have a say in what happens to their bodies. Today we will educate you on all the conditions for undocumented persons in state facilities and why they are not acceptable. We will also elaborate further on the argument for federal funding and why we do not believe that adoption is always an option. Today we ask of you just one thing: to stand with us in the right for women's reproductive rights. With the title of best country on earth, you would think that America would like to grant women's complete freedom over their bodies. If more than half of the world's countries can legalize abortions completely, why can't we? Thank you.
Kristen Sanders. Whenever you're ready.
Judge, as a brief roadmap, I will be refuting the arguments previously stated by our opponents, and then I will go on to discuss our third contention. First off, I would like to say that a miscarriage is not an abortion. A spontaneous abortion is actually called a miscarriage. Our contention 3 incentivizes illegal immigration. By allowing undocumented, unaccompanied minors to obtain an abortion under the care of the Department of the Health and Human Services, we incentivize more undocumented immigrants to enter the United States. Increasing undocumented immigration in the United States is harmful for both the nation and the immigrants themselves. By allowing immigrants to enter the country illegally, we continue to increase the crime rate, mistreat those who immigrate to our country for work, and increase the number of victims of human trafficking. According to the Pew Research Center, there were 11 million unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. in 2015, and a small but statistically significant decline from the center's estimate of 11.3 million in 2009. Not only is undocumented immigration harmful for Americans, but for immigrants themselves. The website law.com provides an overview of some of the dangers of illegal immigration, saying that despite the high amount of crime from undocumented immigrants, the majority of illegal immigrants entering the country from Mexico come with the intention of better employment opportunity. The majority of illegal immigrants are subjected to dangerous work conditions and neither provided with any guarantee of employment nor compensation for injuries sustained on a job site. Due to the fact that a majority of illegal immigrants work in areas of manual labor, this lack of compensation resonates further. Based on growing trends in illegal immigration, employers have no incentive to raise pay or improve conditions. As a result, these workers are often underpaid and overworked with no representation. By incentivizing illegal immigration, we aren't only creating victims out of those who come here to work, but we're also creating victims of human trafficking. The Federation of Immigration Reform claims the following. In many cases, the victim is lured into migrating to the United States with the hope of a better life or economic opportunity. They are then smuggled into the country and meet with the trafficker. However, when the victim arrives, the trafficker imposes a large debt and forces them to work in order to pay off the debt, at which point they become human trafficking victims. In other cases, immigrants will come to the United States not knowing the language or how to get an education or job, and human traffickers exploit that lack of knowledge and opportunity. For example, Chandra Wilruntu lived in Indonesia before coming to the United States. She left the country in economic and political turmoil after seeing that newspaper ad about available hospitality jobs in the United States. Upon arriving at the airport, she discovered that the men who picked her up were not taking her to a hotel, but to a brothel where she was forced to have sex with other men in order to pay off her imposed debt of $30,000. Judge, This means that illegal immigration not only harms the United States, but the immigrants themselves, as they ultimately be taken advantage of in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Y'all can come up whenever you're ready. You don't have to wait on me, I promise. Whenever you're ready.
My fellow students, I would first like to thank the other team for joining us today and presenting us with your arguments. However, there are some flaws in your claims. Our opponent mentioned immigrant workers and their rights, something that this House questions the relevance of. The affirmative also brought up federal funding, which is a great segue into our first contention. Contention 1. Federal funding will still be used no matter what. Abortion or birth, someone is going to have to pay for this baby. First, according to Planned Parenthood, an abortion can cost anywhere from $0 to $1,000, while the process of giving birth can start at a few grand and go upward to $30,000 if you don't have insurance, saving the taxpayers and or the government thousands of dollars if she were to have an abortion. Second, if a mother were to give her son or daughter up for adoption, who is to say that that child is going to go into a good family, when in fact it's more likely for that child to end up in the foster care system? So no, adoption may not always be an option. This kid could very well end up spending 18 years of their life in a broken system that has been known to treat kids poorly and unjustly. And we found evidence of this by testimonies of kids who were in the foster care system and countless articles stating evidence. And third, if the mother was not allowed to get an abortion and she decides to keep the child and have them in the States, that child is now a U.S. citizen. Is the child treated as a U.S. citizen, or is it forced to stay here and be raised by adoption agencies, foster care system, while the parent is being deported back to their home country? You spoke of fairness. How is this fair? Tearing apart families. Well, what if she just came here legally? Because if she came here legally, then she would actually have the right to an abortion. But she's undocumented, so she doesn't. Actually, there are some undocumented people who did come here legally, and they don't have access to abortions or health care, which brings me to our second contention. Contention number 2. If an undocumented immigrant is being held in a state facility and going about their lives as a citizen, then they should have the same rights as every other citizen in this country. If they're detained in a government-funded facility, and then are they allowed to see government-funded doctors, or will they be unmedicated? There are thousands of people living here legally who are still undocumented technically, people who are not able to have access to health care or things such as an abortion. Here they are working, paying taxes on everything they purchase, buying homes, and yet they're still being treated as second-class citizens. This is a true reality for people who are here under DACA or Dreamers or work visas. They're still technically undocumented people, but yet they're here completely legally, and they don't have rights to any of this higher health care. So even if you're paying taxes or working in the U.S. or even going to school in this country, you aren't considered a citizen. Us, the negative, we are defending those who are paying here, who are paying to live here, but aren't receiving the same rights as every other citizen. So we ask you to open your hearts and have empathy for these people. Because at the end of the day, this is a human rights issue. And documented or not, those brave people deserve to be heard, and they deserve our empathy. Thank you for listening, and that's all I have.
Cool, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Mind if I stand over here?
That's perfectly fine. Let me go ahead and...
I just
Gotcha.
computer.
Melissa, right? Okay, Melissa, whenever you're ready.
Timekeeper ready? Opponents ready? Team ready? Alright. Judge, as a brief roadmap, I will be refuting the arguments previously stated by our opponents, and then I will go on to discuss the fourth contention. We are not debating whether or not women have the right to an abortion. We are arguing about whether or not any legal, unaccompanied minor should be allowed to have an abortion in the United States. Where do you think the money for this procedure comes from? Unless a sponsor is found, the U.S. government is the one who pays for the bill, and this money comes directly from taxpayers' dollars. Now, a sponsor can be found, but as recent studies have shown, it's incredibly hard for a young woman, especially an unaccompanied, illegal young woman, to find a sponsor in the United States. So please tell me where you will find evidence to back up this claim. Also, how can you question the relevance of immigrants to this case when a part of our resolution uses the word undocumented? This is an abuse of the education of this round. Also, you said that Planned Parenthood says that abortion is anywhere from $0 to $1,000. After looking it up, you have not offered which method of abortion you are referencing to, and you misspoke. Planned Parenthood says that the abortion pill is anywhere from $0 to $945. If an undocumented woman has an abortion and there are complications, she'll be left at the mercy of safety net hospitals, which are known for putting off treatment until the situation has escalated to life or death. That is why contention 4 is about health care for immigrants being notorious for being underdeveloped. Immigrants, both legal and unauthorized, often rely on a patchwork of safety net hospitals and clinics for free or reduced price medical care, including state and county-owned facilities, as well as charitable and religiously affiliated facilities. The reliance on the system has led many states and communities to be concerned about uncompensated health care costs for uninsured immigrants and the state and local fiscal burdens that result. U.S. Census data shows that immigrants are more likely to be uninsured than native-born citizens. Overall, non-citizen immigrants are more likely to be uninsured than native-born citizens. The percent of naturalized citizens who are uninsured is about 17%, and that's between non-citizens and native citizens. The discrepancy between immigrants and native-born Americans persists among those with incomes below 200% of the poverty line. This is about $30,000 per year for a family of 3. Among the low-income category, 56% of non-citizen immigrants are uninsured versus 23% of native-born citizens. Job-based health insurance is offered to 87% of non-Hispanic white citizen workers, but only to 50% of Latino immigrant workers. However, when they are offered health insurance, comparable numbers of white citizens and Latino immigrants accept the offer and take employer-sponsored insurance. Providing health care to the 1.6 million undocumented immigrants in Texas is an existing challenge. Despite continued growth of this vulnerable population, legislation between 1986 and 2013 has made it more difficult for states to provide adequate and cost-effective care. As this population ages and develops chronic illnesses, Texas physicians, healthcare administrators, and legislators will be facing a major challenge. New legislation, such as the Affordable Care Act and immigration reform, does not address or even attempt to solve the issue of providing health care to this population. One example of inadequate care and poor resource allocation is the experience of undocumented immigrants with end-stage renal disease, more commonly known as ESRD. In Texas, these immigrants depend on safety net hospital systems for dialysis treatments. Judge, this means that illegal immigrants get the worst of the worst health care. The Affordable Care Act has done little to address the issue of providing medical care to these people. Many undocumented citizens have found themselves battling with ESRD and cancer, and they can't afford the treatment for it. Their only source of treatment is these safety net hospitals, and that is only when their condition has become so severe that treatment doesn't even work half the time. These hospitals are often forced to turn people away due to constant financial epidemics. In light of this, do we, as American citizens, feel comfortable sending a minor into a situation where she may feel forced to find a possibly subpar abortion, which could lead to sepsis or hemorrhaging and thus maternal mortality?
Oh,
Girl, I was like shaking. You did really well. Thank you. I got so red though. Oh my gosh.
Taylor, you good?
I know.
Cool. All right.
Ooh.
And how do you spell your last name?
V as in Victor, U-O-N-G. I'm also going to use the
Okay, cool. And we will keep it there. And whenever you're ready.
So we recognize the point that the affirmative side made about U.S. women's rights not being recognized.
So if our own system can't follow procedures for our own citizens, why are you gonna put your faith in them that they'll follow this resolution in effect of that? So I'm gonna start by talking about some of our disadvantages that would be made with this resolution. So one disadvantage of this resolution is the failure to take into account the ethics of it all. Let's say this does pass and go into effect. You're bypassing the possibilities of child endangerment. Whether that child be born in the US and is now being separated from their mother and being deported, who is being deported and they stay here, being raised in foster care, or even before the child is born, while she's in state facilities and isn't granted access to medical care, such as in the case currently circling. So this goes back to the case of Jane Doe that is currently being taken to Supreme Court, where an undocumented minor was granted access to an abortion. She was being held in Brownsville, Texas. She raised the money for her abortion herself. She was taken to a Christian clinic where they tried to convince her not to get the abortion instead of the original clinic appointments that she had made. And they refused to take her to the abortion clinic after she got approved by a judge to receive one. So what makes you believe if they end up raising this child, they'll provide proper medical care for the child, since they wouldn't even allow her to get her own money and approval from the judge? Ethically and even legally, this sounds a little fishy and not right with these options. During an interview with Democracy Now!, Susan Hayes spoke of how the law used to be that minors got approval from their social workers and the clinic that they were being held at. This changed, and the decision went to the judges when a Catholic clinic granted a girl access to this, and the church was furious. The problem with that decision going to a judge is how difficult it is for a young girl to get to a trial and within the time period, since we've seen this happen in many cases, such as Jane Doe's, where they tried putting her trial past the 20 mark date. And then another disadvantage that we have is, for instance, in the case of human trafficking, as our opponents brought up. Yes?
Jane Doe did have a bit of a struggle in holding down a sponsor. How would you address that?
And so in how she was holding down the sponsor, the United States actually in the, Susan Hayes in Democracy Now! Also said that she was abused at home. Her parents back home, they were forced to call her parents back home. She had to tell them that she was pregnant, with the government fully knowing that she had told them her parents had beaten her sister for also getting an abortion and getting pregnant out of wedlock, which goes back into our first main, during our introduction, when we said that that is one of the contentions for them being, becoming a citizen and bypassing that.
What does that have to do with finding a sponsor?
Finding a sponsor, that's the jurisdiction. They have to get the jurisdiction approval from an appointed guardian. And so, back to our other disadvantage in the instance of human trafficking. Many undocumented minors are brought over to be sold into the sex trade and for labor, just as our opponents said. But also, it's proven that the reason they're over here, and that passes if they are caught, and it's proven that they were in a sex trade, it's still a long wait to gain citizenship, and an unborn fetus isn't going to make that wait with them. And so what happens then? Since they're on the track to become a citizen, are they treated as such? And just in the same as the work visas and the DACA citizens that we previously announced, a lot of them are on their way to citizenship. So what happens in that process? Are they a citizen? Since they are over here, they are paying taxes, and they are giving to our funds. There's too many holes that just don't fit ethically with this resolution. And so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had another one, but I have it.
Okay, so summary speakers should be Joshua Martz.
There's no prep time, right? No prep time.
No. What was that term? Yeah, what was the last term? Okay, cool. Has anybody been under time? I don't remember anybody being under Question whenever you're ready.
Is Judge ready?
Ready.
Timekeeper, are you ready? Opponents ready?
Yes.
Team, are you all ready? Okay. So Judge, as a brief roadmap, I'm just simply going to be working my way down the flow of today's debate and just be trying to address all of the arguments brought up by the negative team and just reinforce some of the points of our case. Okay. Sorry, we're the wrong part of the flow. Okay, so I would like to begin first with the first negative constructive speech, just some of the arguments brought up there. One of the points that Sophie had made is that adoption is not always an option, and this has been something that the negative team has recurringly brought up throughout the debates round, and it hasn't really been addressed yet. And what I just want to say is that this doesn't necessarily pertain to the resolution of the round. We're dealing with the legality of undocumented immigrants, and specifically minors, and so we're not necessarily debating the adoption of these children, but the actual act of the abortion itself. Another point that I wanted to address is that in Rebecca's speech, the second negative constructive speech, the point was made that shouldn't these women have the same rights as if they were living legal citizens, that pay taxes, that work, shouldn't we show them the same empathy? But this kind of argument doesn't necessarily make sense because we still have an obligation to uphold law in the United States. That's one of the things that makes the United States as prosperous as it is and makes it as successful of a country as it is our legal and justice system. If someone were to go out and commit mass murder, if they were murdering previous convicts, we wouldn't applaud them. We would still detain them and arrest them. We would still uphold the same laws. And the same principle applies to this situation, that just because this area is a little more morally gray, we can't just overlook laws because of this. Another major point that the negative team has brought up is the endangerment of child, and separating a mother from their child is an inherently bad thing. But what the negative team has yet to do throughout any of their speeches is really provide any sort of logical base for this. They just kind of go off of the assumption that everyone in this room will sympathize with this, and they just hope that this is what's going to strengthen their case. But they don't provide any sort of evidence or examples, any statistical data that proves that this is something that actually happens, that this is something that we should actually care about, and that's not anything that's been, none of that information has been brought up in this round today. Again, I just want to, and then a huge thing that the negative team concluded with in the last speech was the ethics of the resolution itself. And I just wanted to clarify the ethics of myself and my team, is that the way we interpret, the affirmative team interprets this resolution is done in a way that is, if anything, but extremely, extremely ethical. We're not saying that women shouldn't have the right to an abortion. We're saying that there's a certain procedure and a certain legal precedent established that establishes a correct way of doing so. What we're doing, we're not trying to take away anyone's civil liberties. In fact, the way we interpret the resolution, and the reason we want to uphold the resolution, is because it protects the rights of people who are citizens and people who are not citizens. In our second constructive speech, in Kristen's speech, our third contention specifies that we're protecting immigrants who are moving into the country, as well as the citizens themselves. And I just kind of want to pull everything back into focus with a theme that's been sort of embedded throughout today's case, is this theme of justice. We open with a quote that fairness is what justice really is. And I think that's what our team represents, is the justice of the United States legal system and the justice of protecting the rights of citizens, of women, and of American citizens. And so, Judge, I plead to you personally that you vote in favor of justice and that you vote in favor of an affirmative ballot.
Okay, thank you. Michael Rosales.
We believe in you.
Whenever you're ready, Michael.
As previously stated, we stand here to discuss why we do not agree with the resolved issue of the U.S. Supreme Court should rule that undocumented, unaccompanied minors do not have the right to an abortion when under the Department of Health and Human Services. We believe this resolved issue is wrong due to the following reasons. Our team had a variety of ideas and points in our debate, which I would like to summarize these points from the negative standpoint. First, we argue that since Jane Doe was held in state facilities, being treated as though she was a citizen, why is she not considered one? Our first main point was the answer to this question. Our Jane Doe was fulfilling all of the requirements that American citizens does, such as paying taxes, working, pretty much just living life as an American citizen. Yet these immigrants are not granted the same right and benefits of a normal citizenship. But they are still contributing to the overall economy of the United States. One could even argue that a hardworking, undocumented, unaccompanied minor may be a bigger contribution to our economy in comparison to current homeless and American citizens. The affirmative argued about federal funding. We refuted to that argument by elaborating on why the argument for federal funding of abortions for illegal immigrants is unfair for a woman. Some may argue that abortion is wrong and immoral, and that a pregnant woman should just put their child up for adoption and everything will be okay. This is not the answer for a multitude of reasons, such as mentioned before. A mother should not have to put herself through a full pregnancy because doing so and giving birth would be a violation of her reproductive rights. What gives the government the right to decide what you do and do to your body? Also, the adoption system is flawed and unreliable in deciding the fate of where and what conditions the child will end up. You had mentioned earlier the, what is that? Memorandum, the ESR, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Just forget about that one. Either way, whether that being abortion or adoption, federal funding prices will still take a hit to handle the situation. The laws of immigration currently in place in the U.S. today are already strict and a gruesome process for immigrants currently residing in the U.S. That being said, current immigration laws, when a person is undocumented as well as a minor, the laws in place put minors through a lengthier process in comparison to their adult age counterparts. Undocumented children have to go through at least 3 agencies within a short time frame as they await their fate. So some of your arguments to us kind of contradicted themselves. These are humans coming for a better life, not murderers. Our argument about adoption is relevant because the fetus exists outside of an abortion. The other team is obviously thinking in the same term and not the long run. If they don't get an abortion, a child exists after that. I would also like to bring up to the healthcare debate that had no relevance to the rest of the argument. Just gonna go ahead and move on to the conclusion. So in conclusion, I would like to thank the affirmative side for participating in this interesting debate topic with us. The most important thing to remember in this debate is no matter what your views are in religion or morals, everyone's life is not a constant flow of happiness, and tough decisions must be made for a promising future. For our example case, in relation to the resolution, Jane Doe's case matters for other undocumented minors too. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Wonderful debate. That was great. That was a very good debate. Morally, all good. Strongest one. How do you turn this thing off so I can give them a debriefing? I also don't want to get recorded debriefing. Right here.